Happy Monday, everybody. How's it going?
It's going well.
Going well?
Welcome, Jesse.
Hey, Jesse, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course. Of course.
Now everybody, they should know this. This is important. We found out just a minute ago you live in your dad's basement. So whenever somebody does a comment, I'll be like, this is Joe from his dad's basement.
Some context, just a few minutes ago, my dad walked by. He's hanging out here for a bit before he goes to Asia, and so it's it could be some interesting paradox where you're not sure whose basement one of us lives in, but yeah.
So is this like the ESPN commercial where you're going to stand up and you don't have any pants on? And do you remember that ESPN commercial?
I don't remember that prescient.
It's like pre-pandemic, right? And then that kind of stuff actually started happening like 2 years ago.
Oh yeah, if you can Google and find that ESPN commercial is so funny.
That's awesome. I saw a video the other day where it was somebody talking about corporate camaraderie or something, and some guy got up and he was in his boxers, but he was wearing a suit jacket. The other guy gets up and he is doing the same thing, and so I figure it's pretty common. I don't know. I never do that, as far as anyone knows, but anyway, cool. So. So for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. My name is Jesse Anderson. My company is called Big Data Institute. We mentor companies all over the world on big data, both from an organizational and technical point of view. Before that, I was at Cloudera. Other things I do, I write quite a bit, so hopefully your viewers have had a chance to either read something I've written. I've written 3 books on the subject as well. Or my blog at jesse-anderson.com. Latest book is called Data Teams, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And then I also do a podcast called the Data Dream Team Podcast, where I interview various luminaries around the world on how they run their team. So much more on the management side than on deep tech.
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, I mean, you've been on my radar for a while. I think, way back in when data engineering was becoming a thing, I think you were one of the first people to be writing about it. This was back in the 2010s-ish, around there, unless you're writing earlier and I didn't know about it. But I was, it's search data engineering and your name kept popping up all the time. So that was pretty cool. What gave you the foresight to, I guess, write about that topic way back in the day?
It was being in a consultative role. So I talk about this pretty often, but being a consultant, you get to see a stream of data and you get to make connections that somebody at a single company can't do. So somebody at a single company, they get this myopic view and they say, these are all the problems my company has, and these are all the problems that exist in the world. And when you're in consulting, you're able to say, well, this company has this problem, this company has this problem. And you see this pattern of those problems. And the pattern of those problems was a bunch of data scientists, a bunch of DBAs, data warehouse people, but none of those 3 groups was actually the right person or team to do this right. Mm-hmm. So lots of research, lots of talking to people, and you start to see, oh, there's this data engineering thing, and this is a whole need. So I basically made it my goal, mission, to educate people on that. So that was writing in O'Reilly, that was writing books about that. And I'd like to say, yes, hey, in fact, I put this up on, I think, LinkedIn the other day. I actually got data engineering spam. That was how I knew I had made it in the world, or data engineering has made it in the world. I got spam saying, we will create a data engineering team for you. Score 1 for the good guys.
Nice. I feel like another phenomenon with consulting is that you're not at a company just to collect a paycheck, to show up every day. You're there to create results, right? Like your job is to create results, to get things done. And so you tend to have more of this team focus because that's quite often what prevents you from getting the job done. I mean, what do you think, Joe?
Well, yeah, for sure. It's where to begin on that one? I mean, consulting definitely, I think, gives you a perspective that you're not going to get being an employee at a company. Because, I mean, typically as an employee, too, you're focused on the thing you're hired to do, right? The moment you start kind of, I would say expanding your scope of either your interests or your capabilities or your I guess your role, that also has consequences. Either people like that, or they just like it so much they give you more work. Maybe with more money, maybe not. But as a consultant, you're paid to come in and really, I think, assess the bigger picture of things, just because you have a different perspective on things. So but I think data is really interesting too, and kind of echoing what Jesse said, where I think for the longest time it was everything was very piecemeal, right? But it really took, I think, somebody like Jesse's writings to really glue it all together. I think he was one of the first people I saw that was really doing that. So thanks, Jesse.
When you create my statue, I'm going to give some recommended poses, maybe something like this. Like, that you see those YouTube videos where somebody's got that weird face to make you watch the video. I want that to be my statue, where I'm kind of like this or something like that.
It's pretty funny. So Jesse wants a meme.
I want to live forever as a meme, please.
So for the audience, if you can make it happen for him, that'd be great. I'll pitch in some money. We'll make this happen for you.
Will the inscription be in English or Portuguese? That's the next question.
Both, and maybe in Latin too. But the only Latin I know says Rex. So if you put that in there, that'll be good.
That's funny. Speaking of Portuguese, you recently moved. Last time we talked, we did a Data Nerd Herd episode 2-3 years ago, something like that. But now you're you moved. Tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, about a year ago, I moved to Lisbon, Portugal, and it's really been interesting. I've really enjoyed the people, really enjoyed the food. Portuguese wine, it doesn't make it outside of Portugal except for port wine. But if you ever get the chance and you see some Portuguese wine on a menu, try it. It's really good. Alentejo region, Dow region. There's some good wines. And it's been a very interesting experience. My kids are learning Portuguese. I'm learning Portuguese. Wife's learning Portuguese. The food is amazing. There's this stuff called pastel de nata, which are these little custard pies about that big. And then you put cinnamon on it, and I love cinnamon. So, all kinds of things.
That's cool.
Octopus. Gotta love the octopus there.
I feel bad about eating octopus, though, because they're such smart creatures that I'm like, I don't know. It feels like cannibalism or something.
Well, I just watched my octopus teacher right before we moved. And so the most octopus, if you were to graph out octopus eaten in my life, it's pretty much on the 0 bar all the time. My octopus teacher comes out, and then I moved to Portugal, and it goes up significantly. So there's definitely some causation and correlation to. He didn't talk about how tasty they were in that show. I don't know why.
They are pretty good, actually.
As data people, we're really missing some data points. Now we understand.
That's awesome. And then it sounds like you're at a conference too. You want to talk about that real quick?
Sure. Yeah. So apologies on the background noise, and this isn't my usual setup. I actually have a setup similar to Joe's.
And his dad's basement in Portugal. Yep.
In my dad's basement in Portugal. It's far more dank in there. Much less lighting, much more Slayer t-shirts and that sort of thing. But I'm at Berlin Buzzwords this week, and it's the first in-person conference I've been to since COVID started. So I've been it's been nice to reconnect with people. It turns out those people didn't go off into the ether during COVID, and we still have our masks. So I've got my mask here, but yes, you can have a conference. You can be safe, and you can meet people. And I think a few things that they did different is there's a lot more outside areas. So there's up on the roof, there's an area that people are, and then there's an outside kind of beer garden eating area. So probably a trend we'll see. And then there's also people who can attend it online, but I'm attending in person.
That's a good call. It's not that far from Lisbon. I think a few hours, right? Flight.
Yeah, it's 3.5 hour flight, 3 hour, 40-minute flight. So That's the big difference. And then if you look right there, they have Mario Kart, but it's not an emulated Mario Kart. That is the actual Nintendo 64 back there, real one. Bringing back memories.
Yeah, we were noticing that earlier. I was like, what is that? But yeah, it's Mario Kart. It's pretty fun. I have to go play that after. I got a comment from Andy Petrella. You know Andy?
Hey, Andy.
What's up?
So yeah, I of all the people I thought would have been here, Andy, I thought you would have been here. Where are you?
He's actually on his way to Salt Lake, and Matt somehow dropped off. Hopefully Matt comes back. There's Matt. Yeah,
There we
but
go.
Andy's in the States right now, so we're actually going to be he's speaking at my meetup on Wednesday in Utah. So for anyone in Utah, come down to Neighbor's office in Lehigh. Andy Petrella is going to be dropping some knowledge on data observability. So anyway, shameless plug for that.
Yeah, if you ever get the chance to hear Andy speak, avail yourself of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty smart guy. So, let's jump into the topic that we want to talk about today. Data teams. You recently wrote a book by the title. First of all, like what is a data team? Let's level set with. I think it's a pretty basic knowledge here.
Sure. So the very core thing of a data team is it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about a minute ago, and that is who does this data thing. So oftentimes this data project starts out with some C-level, maybe some board level mandate that says we're going to be data driven now, and then it throws up and we just put some Kafka in, we put some Spark in, some Snowflake in, and then things just kind of move on their merry way, and that rarely happens. So what we have to do is we have to get a team in place, a data team in place that handles the nuances of data. And that data team is made up of 3 teams. We have our data science team, we have our data engineering team, and we have our operations team. So starting with our operations team, they're the ones keeping things up and running. So even if you're using something like Snowflake, you still need somebody making sure that your code's running, your stuff is running. We have our data engineering team that's made up mostly of data engineers. They're the ones handling more of the complex programming behind the scenes. And then we have our data scientists. These are the data scientists we've come to know and love, where they're taking that mathematical background. They know some programming, and they can make these AI ML models. But what's key here is sometimes people ask me, well, what's the most important one? And there isn't a most important one. It's all 3 working seamlessly together, symbiotically together. And if you have a break in one of those or a missing one of those, then you have some real problems. The most common one that I've seen is data scientist, data engineer, no data engineering. And what happens there is that data scientists create a mountain of technical debt. And so a lot of my consulting work is actually, hey, let's take apart that mountain of debt created by the data scientists. And it's not, that's just a week. No, this is years. So be careful there, everybody who's listening.
Well, I feel like in the early days of data science and big data, there really wasn't a focus on teams. Like you would have, this happened to me, you had the president of the company run out and hire a data scientist with a PhD and then expect magic. I mean, why did we lose sight of the need for teams back then? It sabotaged a lot of projects, basically.
I think it was the vendors, quite frankly. I think a lot of the vendors were saying, step 1, buy our product. Step 2, profit from data, instead of, but there definitely is a technical part to this. But I started really speaking about the initial success or failure is so I had this graphic in my talk, and I would say the initial success or failure is actually team-based. It's not the technology-based. So we've all seen that statistic, 85% of data projects failing. Well, the majority of them failed before a line of code was written. And yeah, it was start with our technology, then figure out what to do, rather than get the right people choose the right technology, then the right technology and people create this data product that's actually usable and business insight and value.
Yeah, I think that's how we assess things too. It's always the people, process, and then technology. It's very rarely, I wouldn't say very rarely. It's if you try and I think put technology before the other two, it's inevitably have big problems. So big problems and big bills. That also happens. So
yes, yeah. One thing that perhaps people should know is, hey, if the C-level comes to you and says, hey, we have unlimited budget for this thing, just go higher, eventually that will change. You will get a point in time where there's some piper, there's some CFO that says, why are you spending 1 million a year, 10 million a year, and what are you getting out of it? And then you have to eventually say, oh yes, we get very little ROI for our spend. And that's when a bunch of hammers come crashing down, or you have 6 months to turn around an ROI, and it just doesn't work that way. So really do spend some time on your ROIs, on your business value.
Yeah, it's one thing to be at Google and be on a research team, but I think even Google has kind of started tightening up some budgets that were pretty free-flowing before.
Yeah. That's interesting. So this is the vendor side of the equation, which we've seen as well. I think especially in the early days, and what we're talking about, and for the audience, this is around like maybe 2010 through, I don't know, kind of mid to late 2010s. There was, so data science was a sexy job, right? Everyone wanted to hire a data scientist. Everyone wanted to be a data scientist, so that worked out really well. You also had a lot of big data vendors out there, I think gratuitously selling the promise of, big data transformation if you just buy our tool, but only if you buy our tool. If you don't, then sorry, like nothing's going to happen. So, so it was a confluence of these two things, but there was such a, I think a focus on the outcome of what data science could produce, that we sort of lost focus on, the hard work to build the foundation to get there. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a funny thing you use that word foundation. That was the talk I was giving when COVID hit. It was called Foundations of Data Teams. And so what I'd do is I would explain it, and I'd say, here are the 3 teams, and then I'd equate that to a foundation of a building. And you probably, you might have heard of the one in San Francisco. It's called the Millennium Tower. It's the one that's gradually leaning more and more. And so I say, okay, you might have heard of that. And I actually show the picture of the foundation of the Millennium Tower being built and saying, hey, if we're going to build a pretty big, tall building, we're going to need a foundation that goes pretty deep. It needs to be, because if we don't build that and we build this 100-story or even a 50-story thing, 20-story thing, and we don't build the foundation right, we're going to have problems. And so I help that show, hey, if you don't build this right, the foundation was the problem. And, some people will say it was the architect's fault. Some people will say it was the builder's fault. And some people say it was this person's fault. No matter what, there's a problem there in the foundation. And if you don't do that right with right process, you're going to list. And so the point I try to make there is, it's always possible to fix your teams. But in the case of that Millennium Tower, for example, it's very costly to do it after the fact. Because your timelines, in their example, they're looking at 200, 300 million, maybe even $400 million of just trying to fix it, trying to keep it from moving around more. Very similar in our foundations and our data teams. It's always easier to do it the right way the first time, but it can be difficult to do it while the project's in flow. But you have to do it. It's never going to fix itself.
And I'll loop back to something you said earlier, which is that on a data team, the data scientists aren't more important, the data engineers aren't more important. They are all part of the team's success. But what I think Joe and I have the attitude, by the same token, that data engineering is kind of the foundation, right? And it's not that the data engineers are more important, but they are a prerequisite to doing great data science and machine learning in production, I think.
Well, we both experience what happens when you don't have that foundation. I mean, you end up becoming recovering data scientists like Matt and me. And,
that's right. Don't let this happen to you.
I mean, Matt's only 17 years old, but look at him. It was crazy. Got a question here from Elton. He asks, how do data scientists and AI developers interact or depend on each other?
So the data scientists, depending on how that's set up, sometimes companies will have. From your question, I'm actually surmising you have data scientists in more of a research function, and then AI developers in more of a productionization function. And that's what I'm going to guess you have there, Elton. I've seen that, but I haven't ever seen that work well. Usually because the AI developers are just one very small step above in technical proficiency than the data scientists are. So the data scientists at zero programming ability or just a little bit, and then the AI developer just a sliver above that. And so my hunch there, Elton, is that you probably are missing data engineers quite a bit, and a good healthy relationship between your data scientists, AI developers, whatever you want to call them, and your data engineers. Now, one possibility there is the machine learning engineers, and I talk about them in my book. So the key part of a machine learning engineer is that the machine learning engineer are equally versed in both. So they are equally happy in, you could give them a full-on data science interview, and you could give them a full-on computer science data engineering interview, and they could pass either. Those people are really the unicorns.
Oh, yeah.
What I've always thought is the MLEs, the machine learning engineers, were what the data scientists were promised in the 2010s,
Yep.
like you were just talking about, Joe. So to your question, Elton, you probably are missing some right people. That's me obviously reading into that, but create a symbiotic relationship, look for missing people in there, but that's my hunch is what you have.
That's cool. Good question. And Elton, what's up? I just recognized Elton in his picture. He's from Salt Lake, so hit me up sometime. We need to catch up. So we've got another question from Rabbit. He says, which role do you see getting hot in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yes. Hi, Ravit. I've seen your stuff as well. Let's see. Role getting hot. It's definitely data engineers. I think that is going to keep on going. Perhaps machine learning engineers as we see this gradual improvement in our continual improvement in data science, that we are going to have more machine learning engineers out there, and there'll be hopefully less of a unicorn. But I think it's still definitely the data engineers. Perhaps a one that's coming up is machine learning in operations. So what companies, as companies are actually seeing, operations for machine learning is a whole different thing, then they're gradually saying, actually we do need a person in that role doing something very, very different. And I think it's a good step up for an operations person to really look at that, of how can you do the operations for it? How can you, what skills? Because I don't think there's much training, or there's a few vendor products out there for it. But I think that those two roles are the key ones in the 2 to 3 years.
I tend to agree with this too. And I think it's interesting. I definitely am in the orbit of the MLOps communities and ML engineering worlds, but I wouldn't say it's a dead ringer to sort of the what we saw in the past with we were discussing data scientists and big data back in the day, but it is very similar. I think there's a lot of vendor pushes out there, but if you try and zoom into what are the best practices in say MLOps right now, right? It's not as clear, and so it definitely seems like there's a technology push versus a best practices push. And thankfully, I think thanks to people like the MLOps community, for example, this is definitely getting fleshed out. But it definitely seems like in everything, there's vendors that pop up, and they're doing what vendors do, right? So you can't fault them for that. But hopefully practices, best practices are recognized and consolidated. So, but thankfully we do have a template which is DevOps, and that seems to have provided, I think, a lot of context to both data ops and now ML ops. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the evolution of ML ops, Jesse?
I think it's going to be similar things, some lateral movement upwards or some lateral movement sideways, kind of like what you're saying. So a DevOps person who really globs on to that machine learning and says, oh, I want to further subspecialize into that. So I see it. If you saw a post I did a while ago, it was a technology tree. I was talking about technology trees in games like Civilization, where as you specialize further and further and further, you go deeper and deeper. I think that's the general recommendation I make to people is the more you can specialize, although to an individual it makes you feel, oh, I'm really boxed in. I really have to, I won't be able to move around. What I found the opposite to be true is they see that you can get to that depth, that level of depth in perhaps one topic. And then if you poke your head up like a gopher and see, hey, there's something else I want to do. Sometimes that's just a lateral move rather than have to retract all the way and start again.
Yeah, I feel like to be really good at ML ops, you need some DevOps proficiency. You need to have some understanding of machine learning and data science. You actually need to know a lot about analytics and stats because you have to be able to observe your data and see if it's changing in weird ways that might represent a change in the world or some flaw with the data itself. And from there, like you're saying, Jesse, you could potentially move back into any of those domains and become a specialist in analytics or machine learning or something else. I don't know. What do you think, Joe?
I agree with that. Yep.
Yeah, and the point you just raised, Matt, is it isn't just this model is performing poorly. Yeah. That's what I don't think people understand is the data coming into the model has changed. There is this skew, and it's really hard for a data scientist or a non-data scientist or a non-person who doesn't understand the data to say, well, is this abnormal or not? You could put an observability check in there and everything's passing. It's between this number and this number, but there may be some other pattern to it that your ops team may need to actually look for, and that could be a whole difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then intrinsically you have this problem, which is kind of the opposite problem, where it fails checks, and then you have to answer the question, hopefully in collaboration with your data scientists. Again, is this a change in the world, or has something broken in my system? This is something we call data entropy, where yes, systems like software systems have entropy, but the outside world has way more entropy, and you always have to take that into account. Like the whole point of modeling and data science is to try to grapple with that entropy and do something.
Well, yeah, and what was that old famous Anscombe's quartet or something, where each you could have like different like the same statistical distributions for a data set, but the data sets are wildly different. So that'll impact it's going to impact a lot of things. So, but yeah, it's yeah, I keep an eye on this kind of stuff for at a personal interest too, just because I'm fascinated by the evolution of especially ops. Ops wasn't something like ML ops wasn't really a thing that I think we were talking about like 5 years ago, for example. This just wasn't a thing, right? But I think that so I'm curious, like the number of models that are being put in production nowadays versus maybe say 4 or 5 years ago. So
it's definitely more. Though what I'm not sure if it's actually in line with the number of the growth in the industry. Put a different way, if there's a 10x growth in number of data scientists, I don't think there's been a 10x number of models, and I think it's much lower than that.
What do you think if you were to equate that to ROI? Say the growth of data scientists versus the I guess maybe we'll call it a GDP or something like that for data science. What would you reckon that would be?
I think it's lower as well. So I wrote this in a post a few years ago, and I said that I'm kind of worried because we're creating some bubbles and gluts in our industry, and they're kind of self-inflicted. Where I've always been worried that the party stops of some bean counter says, okay, your GDP of data scientists is too low. We're going to fire you all, and we're going to write this whole data science thing off. Instead of that's the easy one. The much more difficult one is to look internally. Basically, what we do, look internally and say, no, these are the problems. If you sort out these problems, you will get significantly higher ROI. Mm-hmm. It's this weird ease that I found in companies of it's easier to get a new technology in place. It was the technology. We weren't using this notebook. We weren't using cloud. instead of looking internally at the people and process and saying, oh, that's the problem.
Yeah, you can take whatever magical technology you want, and you're not going to get a whole lot of value out of it unless you have the practitioners who can understand the technology working together in an appropriate, efficient way
Well, to solve a problem that's worth solving.
to solve a problem. Yes.
Yeah, that's key. But it's amazing how often that's overlooked too. So,
Well, that's interesting you brought that up, because I was speaking at a conference recently, and so live during the conference, we actually talked about the ROI of what that data scientist was doing, and it was really, by the data I got, the information I received, it wasn't worth doing. So basically, you had this person doing a very low value task when there was probably much higher ROI tasks. Kind of goes back to this theme of make sure that you're working on something that's, when the bean counters come, that you can actually give them and say, hey, we did this. That's a big lesson that you see in the interviews I do, is sometimes we as technologists, we like to focus on, we put Spark in production. Boom. That's the ROI that I gave. Business people don't care about Spark. They don't care about Kubernetes. They don't care about Kafka. They care about numbers. They care about, we reduced this amount by this amount. There you go. We created this amount in extra revenue. We as technologists need to be speaking to the business in those terms, and really got to internalize that.
well, for sure. I mean, so last year I was remodeling my house, and I never once had a contractor come up to me and say, you got to check out the saw I'm using. The saw it's an awesome saw. This is top of the line. It's a next gen saw. I think I would have fired somebody if they came to be talking about that. Because all I could really care about is, well, like, when are you going to be done with the project, and are you on time, or are you on budget? That's really all I care about. And is it of good quality, right? Am I getting what I paid for? If you wasted my time coming to me, talking to me for like an hour about all your tools, I'd probably find somebody else. So,
out of curiosity, how much does it cost to remodel your basement in your dad's house?
This is a complete redo. I think it was 60 or 70,000 US. Yeah, maybe
It's
more.
an expensive basement.
It's an expensive basement. Yeah. Dad's loaded.
I mean, Joe does have like the perfect man cave going on here. So
No, I have a couple too. There's one upstairs too. It's great. So Actually got a question from Ku. This is the classic question, which we'll now attempt to answer. He asks, what is the first role to hire in any data team?
So I actually answer this in the book. My strong recommendation is data engineer. And it isn't, we touched on this before, that isn't to say data engineer is the most important, but here is why I say data engineer. And I talk more about this in Data Team's book, datateams.io, if you want to go to the website. And that is, I'll start with data scientist, because that may help understand. If you hire a data scientist first, what the data scientist will do is they'll come in, look around for use cases, and then be in an idle state that says, okay, I'm waiting for the data, get the data ready for me, get the infrastructure ready for me. And they'll just, and this isn't hypothetical, I've seen this idle state many times at companies. So you basically have wasted, yeah, it looks like Joe's hit that too. So it is, oh, you actually experienced that, Joe?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Firsthand?
Mm-hmm. Sure, Matt.
And so have I, as a data scientist, actually, so
Okay.
kind of being on the opposite side. That's why I started working on data engineering, because I'm like, well, I'm not going to wait around for this to happen.
Yeah.
No, you figured it out by default, because otherwise, like, you have nothing to do all day.
So you have this issue. So Ku, this is actually an important thing. So here we have two people with firsthand experience talking about this, and that is Joe. It's different, is unique. Not just because he lives in his dad's basement, but because he actually attacked the problem. So then the question becomes, how well did Joe do attacking the problem? Did he keep it together with some duct tape and hope and love, or did he do a good job? because then the next person that comes in is going to have to completely redo his stuff, and that's a key difference. So then we answer the question the way I was talking about it. If we hire a data engineer that data engineer can be spending their time getting data in the right place, right format, right infrastructure, so that when you do hire that data scientist, they're not sitting there idle. They actually have this data ready to go.
Let me ask a follow-up question. Is it important that that first data engineer hire also have some kind of like managerial chops or is good at like helping to hire the rest of the team? Does that matter?
So in our consulting, I've actually hit this problem a few times. So what I suggest is this, that you don't hire a manager because sometimes that manager is too far away from the code. So then their remit becomes more of manage, and I need to hire the rest of the team rather than get this in there, start showing some ROI, and then move on from there. So my suggestion is hire a senior to lead level person. Don't start with a mid-level. Don't start with a junior. They just don't have the experience to do this right yet. And then what you could do is you could manage that, organizationally manage that person out of your software engineering. Just make sure that software engineering manager knows that data is different and that it's not like you don't run agile, but your metrics, that sort of thing is different for data. So that was what I would do. Let's say I'm a CTO level. That's kind of how I would, and I've made that suggestion before.
That's really so. Let me ask you this too. So a data engineer is the first hire. How, for the person hiring the data engineer, how will that person know what to tell the data engineer to give them direction, I guess? Like, what's this data engineer supposed to be building? What's the initiative?
I've written about this too. As you can tell, I've written a decent
Thought about
amount.
this a bit, yeah.
So the issue there is this is part of why you hire a senior to lead level person. So that senior to lead level person knows what to do. You don't have to guide them. You don't have to tell them, okay, use this technology and do this. They should know it. So that's part of what you should be sussing out in your interview is, okay, can you actually do this? The people watching, here's what happens if you hire the wrong person. It becomes a question on Reddit. And this isn't a hypothetical. I've seen way too many questions of, hey, I was just hired to this company and here's my problem. And can you guys figure it out for me? So the answers are either well-meaning to wrong because they don't provide enough context, enough information. So now you've hired somebody with no experience that's going to do something that is worse. So just, don't do that. It's not right. It's not going to be the right thing. So really get your people right. That will get you having success.
Then the elephant in the room is executive support too. So I guess if we were to sort of go all the way to the top of the funnel, the executive and leadership, how should they think about data and data initiatives?
They should, once again, something written about, I talk about it in data teams, and that is, if you do this without executive support, it is going to be difficult. So I talk about the 3 different levels at which you can push for a data initiative. That is from bottom up. Bottom up would be individual contributors saying, hey, we need this. I've only seen that work in a few companies, and they have to be pretty small companies where those individuals took a lot of effort. I have one client who did this, bless their hearts. Some individual contributors kind of took it on themselves. And so I got to see the story and hear the story. Great job for those guys. More often than not, it's in the middle level. So middle management seeing, hey, we've got this problem. We need to push this initiative, and then they can push upwards and lower. But they have to push upwards because the upper management execs need to do that. The best case is when the execs are actually realizing the importance of this, realizing the value of this, and then they push the organization down. And it's not just here's our strategic initiative. It is also here is the funding and the strategic initiative. So that funding, headcount, licenses, cloud costs, all that stuff. Because if you try to do this on a shoestring budget of we hire, perhaps the kind of the question we sometimes will get sometimes is, okay, we have budget to hire one person. Can I find a person who's a mix of a data science and a data engineer all at once? And then, yeah, well, it's possible, but very expensive. But I only have half of what you pay for market. So these sorts of executive sponsorships help you from trying to create this transformer or this completely person that doesn't exist. And if so in some ways, that without that top down, without that executive sponsorship, these projects fail. They fail for a different reason, and they fail not because you don't have the process, not because you don't have perhaps the people, but it's because the executives haven't bought in and haven't given you the air cover, haven't given you what you need to be successful and execute.
That's interesting. Let's talk about sort of the what's going on in the macro landscape right now. So up to now, hiring data talent, I would probably argue any data talent has been challenging. Now it seems that there's two things at play. Companies are putting in hiring freezes. Layoffs are continuing to increase. How do you think this impacts data teams? Because on one hand, I can definitely see a situation where there's more data talent on the market now, but at the same time, maybe not the appetite to hire as much. Have you given any thought to sort of what's going on in the economy right now?
I definitely have, and I've read a few people, and I've tried to keep up with what's happening. So far, the layoffs have been in non-tech domains, and when they did hit tech, it was more it wasn't across the board. It was more in very specific parts. I haven't read of anybody with the title data engineer, data scientist who've been laid off yet. Not to say that there hasn't been, but I just haven't seen. So what I've seen companies do is they're not laying off within their data team simply because they often didn't have their data team completely filled out as it was. So they were, negative people rather than surplus people. It definitely, this potential downturn definitely is something I'm keeping an eye on. So that could be both a benefit and a bane. So some of these companies, some of these more traditional companies having incredible difficulty hiring may get resumes and may get people in place that they never would have been able to otherwise. There would have been far too much competition for that person. And now that person, they're able to get much better people perhaps. So I think that this is a time for companies, more traditional, less tech companies, to really be saying, okay, here, come, you'll have a stable job. Might not be the most, you're going to wear that shirt and walk around tech conferences and everybody says, oh, wow, you work at there. But it still may be a very interesting position and with interesting technology behind it.
The thing I'm really bummed out about is there's not going to be as much cool swag. So,
I mean, we'll see. Maybe they're going to double down on swag.
Yeah. Well, we can go on either side of the bet. I'll go for Swagpocalypse. You go for cool swag, and we'll see. So, just get some questions here from Mike Nash. He's actually got kind of a 1.5-fold question here, which I will ask the first one. In-house or outsource? What are the things and trade-offs to consider?
This is an important question. So when I talk about this with companies, it is, is this your forte? And that's putting it very bluntly. So if I'm talking to a company and they have no software engineering and not even data warehousing, and this is like a manufacturing place, hey, this probably isn't your company's forte, core competency, whatever you want to call it. This is a time when you're saying, hey, maybe outsourcing is the better way, simply because you don't have any management in place that's technical, and you'd have to build it out, and you'd have to do a lot of things. And especially in those manufacturing sort of scenarios, the manufacturing companies think of cogs. You have this cog A, with all apologies to the people on the line, they think everybody's a processing line and that you're an operator on the processing line. And if we give you this input, you will give me X amount of output. And that's really difficult for those sorts of companies to understand. You will have a question mark output and you will need to actually pay far more for those people. So when I'm thinking of in-house, those are the companies, they have some sort of pedigree on their engineering, their software engineering. They understand the difference between data engineering and data warehousing, for example. It's really key. Even then, if they outsource, a big one there is, are you outsourcing to somebody who actually knows what they're doing? I'll speak for you guys, since people may interpret you having a dog in that fight. 99% of consultants out there are absolutely terrible. And when I say terrible, I mean useless. You are literally throwing your money away. And the reason for that is even vendors, they'll have a consulting team, and that consulting team, that consulting team will be made up of people who they could get. So they had the same sort of hiring problems you do. And so they got somebody who maybe knows their technology, maybe doesn't. There's some real significant trade-off there. Mm-hmm. And unless you really know the background, the industry, you may not be able to know and make that choice well. So the strong suggestion I'll make is, if you're hiring a company, especially a consulting company on this, don't cheap out. Hire one with a good pedigree where you can ask and actually say, oh, they were successful with this company, and don't be their first one. More than likely, that first one is going to be an absolute mess.
And I'll add some follow-ons here, Jesse, and I think you're very aligned with us on this, and that is that our ideal consulting engagement is not full outsourcing. In other words, we don't want to come in and do all the work for you. What we want to do is build processes and teams that can carry that forward. And so maybe that's what I would say as well, like insource the team building if you have the resources to do so, but outsource the guidance to build up that team, to set goals, to build up a data program.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, especially if you're just hiring a body shop, right? I mean, I think mm-hmm. to Jesse's point, a lot of the people you're going to get with a body shop are
useless.
Okay. So,
so you don't have to say it. I'll say it.
It's like hiring. It'd be like hiring the Russian army or something, right? So, there's lots of them, and ain't that good. So, yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I would say, to answer Mike's question, if you're going to outsource for competency, outsource for guidance. So these are the things that are really hard to replace, and I would say extremely difficult to find. Whereas pure body shop work is a race to the bottom. There's a reason Ternary doesn't actually do body shop work, for example, our company. It's because the moment you start doing that, the moment you start competing with everybody in the world who's just going to compete with you on price, and that's about it. I wouldn't even say quality is a metric at that point, because if you keep cheaping out, then I don't know how you're going to expect quality to follow suit, right? So, but really good advice, really needle moving advice, is extremely rare and worth paying for every cent of it, because that's what creates ROI. Whether you're getting help from Jesse, whether you're getting help from us, whether you're getting help from the other, top 1% of, consulting companies in this industry. So
I just thought of another thing to say, and that was, I was talking to this salesperson. He was at a very well-known vendor, and he was saying, even within that company, that they knew there was only a handful of people that could actually do it right. So even within our industry, data engineering, there's a handful of people in the world that can do this right, that you would trust to do it right. Yep. That doesn't mean, hey, don't try it. It more means, hey, this is pretty difficult, and if you decide to start outsourcing or getting help, spend the money to do it right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you didn't see me when I was remodeling my dad's basement here, getting 20,000 different contractors to come in, right? You hire the ones who are going to get it done right, who actually, and I would say referrals are a really good source of finding people too. So the industry is small. The data industry is incredibly small. Everybody knows each other. I would say anybody who's operating at a high level knows the other people worth knowing. and you're not going to stake your reputation giving a bad referral. You know, as I tell people, if you're going to refer somebody, would you bet your job on this person or your reputation? Because that's what you're doing. So, but on that cheery note, let's actually make us a follow-up question here, which is somewhat related with regards to the economy and squeezing margins. What would you suggest to bulletproof your team? I think bulletproof being the keywords here.
It starts with Kevlar usually.
So Kevlar vests, get that for your team.
Yeah. Bulletproof. And so I think it's a few things that I'd be doing. So I'm just going to take a wild guess, Mike, that you're in either director level, middle management, somewhere in there. And so what you'll be doing is making sure that your team is actually delivering value, business value, quantifiable business value, and that more importantly, as your team is delivering that value, that you are specifically tooting your own horn. More correctly, the team's horn. So anytime you have FaceTime with, let's say, the CEO, CFO, especially those guys, those bean counters, man. And then not just up the line. Let's say you're a director, you're reporting to the CTO. Now it's really important to be trumpeting that horn to the CEO, the CFO, so that when they're thinking about, let's say we're going to lay off some people in your team, they're thinking, oh, if I lay off somebody in Mike's team, that's going to be a, let's say, 10 million a year loss, where in other places it may be 100,000. So really, really clear value creation. The other thing I would say is with your customers, your business owners. So if you're using Agile, for example, what would you say? The question I like to ask is, let's say Mike's team was completely taken away one day. They fell off the face of the earth. The clusters were shut down. Everything stops. And I'm going to ask your business owner, what do you think? And if they say, that means that you've really lost the battle. You've lost any kind of usage. You've lost any kind of desire, want, and that person isn't going to fight for you. They're going to say, well, it was a foible anyway. We were throwing money away. But if you get on the opposite side, somebody says, I can't live without it. I look at it every day. I look at it several times a day. My people look at it several times a day. We get this and this value from it. That's a whole different story. So it's really focusing on not so much the technology, it's focusing on the communication, focusing on the value delivered.
And one thing I'll add on this is that when the economy starts to have problems, the immediate tendency tends to be to look at tightening the belt, to tightening up spending. But there's kind of a flip side to recessions and other economic changes, which is it's not just the revenue goes down, new opportunities also arise. And so if you can help the business to identify those opportunities using data and saying, hey, this product over here is doing really poorly, but this one over here is getting a lot of love. Maybe we should start focusing on this lower cost product, then the business is going to be pretty happy with you. I mean, if you look, you even go back to the Great Depression, certain industries did just fantastic, like the movies, for example. There were a lot of idle people, and so they get a nickel and go to the movie theater. And so if you can find those kinds of opportunities within your business, you're suddenly going to be very valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good time to play offense if you can, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you got to figure out those opportunities and what they are. And this goes for data teams too. Like now is not the time to be, now is the time to be figuring out how you're going to drive value in a very proactive manner, right? Not just being handed, an edict, but from above, to, defensively play. But I would say a good data team is going to be, again, trying to proactively find ways to move the needle for the business. And so those are the kind of people I want to keep around, where you're actively going out there and trying to find new ways to, to help out and whatnot. So, but got a question here from Lack. How to keep ourselves updated in the right way with growing technologies and architectures like Lakehouse, Data Mesh, Data Fabric, etc. around the data space. Jesse, thoughts?
There's some good ways. Find trusted advisors on this. So some of the stuff you will hear a lot of vendor FUD on, not somewhere between FUD and somewhere between FUD. And here's how here we'll tell you what this means so that you can use our technology to do it. So be careful there. That said, independent voices on this are very, I think, important, because then they aren't, you don't have to try to figure out how their bias and how much their bias is affecting what they're saying.
Right.
So to that end, you have Joe and Matt's show. That's a good way to keep up with these things. You have my podcast, for example.
Tell us about your podcast.
Sure. The Data Dream Team podcast, interview chief analytics officers, CIOs. Even I did one interview with somebody who had the desire to become a CDO. So it was kind of this point in time. Here he was in middle management, and here is his plan to become a CDO, and this is what he was doing to do that. So and then I have in-depth interviews on data mesh. So that's a key one. So one of the interviews I do with Zhamak Dehghani, she's the founder of Data Mesh. It's kind of an intro one. So we did an intro one, but the one I'm most proud of is one I did recently, and that was really in depth, really deep. What are the nuances to this? And since I have a background in this as well, here are some of the points I saw and some of the nuances I saw. Hey, we should be watching for this, so be careful of this. And so we actually talk about that there. So if you want to watch that data mesh or listen to that data mesh one, that's a really good one to do that. I'm really proud of those. Cool. That work. Let's see the other places. There are other good places. One thing I will say is, so as much as I talk about the vendors, on the good side, the vendors are generally pretty knowledgeable. They may be bending the truth, or they may be positioning it to make their stuff look better. But on the other side, sometimes I'll read somebody's blog or somebody's information, and they're not either opinionated in, you can say their opinion's wrong or whatever. Sometimes they're factually incorrect. And sometimes that's the manifestation of they don't actually maybe even know what they're talking about, but they have a large following. So then it kind of promulgates this. So there's lots of ways. Sometimes I've had companies do lunch and learns, and they'll kind of talk about it, or they'll watch a conference talk. Those are good ways that you can do that.
I'd also say go back to the sources too. Like, so I'm active on LinkedIn. I see a lot of posts about data mesh. And the other day, somebody had a really good post where it's like, if you want to learn data mesh, just go read the book. I mean, like, why are you trying to guess what it is when Zhamak took the time to write a book about the very concept that she came up with, right? So I'd also say, like, go back to the sources as much as possible. Like data lakehouses are another one. Go back and read the original, papers and articles on lake houses, understand like where it came from. I think as you point out, Jesse, there's a lot of like third and fourth hand knowledge that I think it's kind of like a game of telephone after a while. And it kind of leaves, it doesn't do the industry any favors because there's just a lot of confusion out there. So
there is. And then you mix in the marketing positioning, and then it becomes even murkier. And So just make sure that as you seek out an information source, that they're knowledgeable, and that, hey, if they have, full, whatever full disclosure that they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The more you know, the more you grow and stuff.
One thing I'll add with vendors is that salespeople are very helpful, but go track down the sales engineers too. I've generally found that the sales engineers, even though they do have a dog in the fight, they tend to be pretty honest about how technology works and what the limitations are and such. Or it's things they don't say. Maybe just listen carefully to the sales engineers, ask a lot of questions, and I think you can extract a lot of information that way after doing what Joe suggested and Jesse suggested.
And nuance to what Matt was just saying, ask that question of the sales engineer without the salesperson in the room.
That is a valid point.
Very valid point. Cool. Coming up in time. Jesse, thanks for coming on the show. Probably have you back on again. We can keep talking about this for a while. For people who want to learn more about you, how can they do that?
You can go to jesse-anderson.com. That's my blog. To get info about the book, Data Teams, it's datateams.io. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect. And I've always tried to share my knowledge as best I can.
Yeah, thanks. So you've been doing that for ages. Like I said, I'm very, every time we talk, I feel like I come away a bit wiser, and I think it's just because you've had a lot of time to think and write about this stuff, which is good. So yeah, I mean, thanks for your contributions to the industry. I really, I appreciate it. I'm sure the audience does too, and Matt does, and my dad does. So,
yeah, it's nice to see people taking the time to really think through ideas carefully. Because going back to what you were saying about blog posts, I think blog posts contribute a lot of value, but sometimes when you try to slice ideas into bite-sized pieces, you don't get the big picture. And there's a lot of value in actually writing books and developing full training courses and such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You got any other books on the horizon?
I do. I thought about writing one about making hard decisions, hard technical decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be so much data. It'd be more, how do you deal with taking out a monolith, or how do you deal with taking out a mainframe, or how do you even go through and make that decision? So what I wanted to do is go through a bunch of case studies, talk to people who've done it. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I'm the most proud of with Data Teams is I didn't just say, here's a bunch of my ideas. I actually went through case studies. Those case studies took a significant amount of time, and they make up about a third of the book. And so I wanted this book to be very similar. Here's this case study of this company, and they did it. And they took out their whatever it was. They rewrote from Perl to Java, for example, or they did this. And I want that because I think that's going to be the next issue for us is we're going to have to put some of these microservices genies back in the bottle, and that's going to be a problem. And we're going to have to do this. We're actually going to have to retire some of these mainframes like we've been talking about. So, problems like that. How do you make the decision, and what do people do that makes them successful?
That'd be a great book. Cool. Well, thanks again. As Mike Nash says, so many questions. Love to have round two. I think that'll probably be in the cards. So stay tuned for a chat on that. But yeah, thanks to the audience. Great questions, great interactions. Next week we have Ethan Aaron on the show. And the week after that, we got Laszlo Stringer. I'm going to be at Snowflake Summit tomorrow in Vegas. So if you're around, hit me up. I'm going to be on a panel later in the day with Chris Tabb, Ben Rogojan, and several other notable people. So this will be at Caesars. So live from Caesars tomorrow. Come check it out. I don't think we have a Friday show, Matt, unless you're bored and want to do one.
Yeah, let's skip the Friday show this week.
Yeah, you're in New York. Matt's in New York City right now.
I'm actually at my brother's place in New Jersey, but I just left New York City. But I'll be in and out all week, and so things could get a little bit insane.
Yeah.
Why are both of you in basements? I just don't understand this.
It's just a thing. It's a thing, man.
I'm in a dank New Jersey basement. Yeah.
The prerequisite is you have to work from a basement. That's it's part of working at Ternary. So just kidding.
We don't have office space. We just work from basements.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Jesse. Cool. Well, have a good time in Berlin. So
Thanks.
Talk to you soon, man.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Best of luck.